this episode of the Growth Catalyst podcast, I'm joined by an actual professor, Professor Kieran Fenby-Hulse. He's had a really interesting background. He pivoted from studying music and has spent the last 20 years in higher education leadership. He's more recently launched a business which is focused on imagination-led strategy. So his work involves blending leadership with creative, imaginative leadership. So he's acting as a connector across some different disciplines. Kieran says that we are all able to be creative, but actually there are some tools that can help us unlock it. And Kieran argues the case for imagination and play at work. He said it helps people problem solve more easily and that adults need to play at work. Has anybody heard of serious Lego? The biggest message that Kieran shares is that rest is absolutely essential. So I'll let him explain how. Go and grab a cuppa and listen. Do you agree with his philosophy?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Really good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So we're going to focus on imagination-led strategy, which I'm really keen to unpack and find out more. But before we get started, can you give us a sort of potted history of your background and how you've ended up here?
Yeah, so like most careers, you always end up somewhere where you don't perhaps first expect. I think it's fair to say most of us, what we planned to do when we were younger isn't perhaps where we are now. So I started out, I studied music during my degrees. I thought I'd do something in that field. What I ended up doing, thinking I'd become a music lecturer or go into the music industry, is working in higher education, but in sort of back office roles, working on research, funding, getting academic work out into the real world. That became a big part of my job, and it changed roles and moved, but it was about supporting people, developing the research strategy, and making sure research had a difference. And I built that through up and moved into different roles, ending up in a leadership role as an associate dean role. It's called leading research and knowledge exchange for arts, business, and the social sciences. And so that's where I ended up July of this year, let's say. And then I decided to make a massive change. So did all this work on strategy development, fueled by creativity. And I decided now's the time to set up my own business. To get back on the ground, really. When you end up in sort of senior management roles, you can start looking a lot at numbers. And I realized something was missing. And I realized what was missing was that creativity and imagination that we need to have good ideas, to innovate and to move with change. So I thought, I'm going to set up a business and take that forward and focus on that alone. And so that's been my history, 20 years in academia, and now going it alone with my own business.
Still down to a few sentences. It's mad, isn't it? So music to numbers, I guess I can understand. Sort of research inside academia, and then obviously you talk about the sciences and the sort of creativity and the entertainment side of things. So I can understand all of that. What would you say your area of expertise is in amongst all of that?
So within that, what became my area of expertise is I worked through into leadership and then started to connect that with my creative expertise and started to merge leadership and creative leadership, imaginative leadership. And so that's the space that I then moved into, a sort of new field that was thinking about imagination, how we use imagination to work together, how we use imagination to think about our futures, and how we can use it in a business context. So that, I would say, is where my expertise came as things started to join. So I'm a connector person. You've got the people that are sort of an engineer and they go deeper and deeper and they learn all the technical stuff of how things work. I connect things across different areas, and that's what I'm good at, and seeing where things connect. And so that's what I started to do and work across disciplines to create this, not a new field. There's plenty of creative leadership people out there, but this idea focus more on imagination and strategic thinking. So I'd say that's where my expertise rests now, but it was over 20 years.
Okay. So I'm guessing there's some science behind sort of tapping into imagination. But does it take a creative person to kind of ended up where you have?
So no, is that we are all creative people. We're using creativity daily when we budget, when we plan, when we think about what our rooms want to look like. This is all creativity in its own way, because we've started to imagine how we want things. And imagination's a skill that goes back almost 300,000 years. It developed within humans when we started to think about the animal's there and it's running. I have to imagine it over there to aim precisely. And so that's when they think we started to imagine a bit on that skill. So it's a long cognitive skill that we've built and trained. We do associate it more with creative disciplines, the artist, the novelist, because they really use those imaginative muscles and train them up and really harness that so that they really put it to the fore in that sense. So that's why we associate it. But we're all creative, we're all imaginative, but we all have the ability to improve that and grow that too. So the first myth I always dispel is everyone's imaginative. I do a little exercise to kind of prove how powerful our imaginations are. And that starts to dispel that idea that it's only for creatives or marketeers, designers, those sorts of things. No, business strategy is highly creative. You've got to look at much complexity and navigate how you're going to go through it and start to imagine what the future of your business in a certain context would look like.
Yeah, I guess as an ex-CEO, I can understand that, and frankly have struggled with that, but been surrounded by great people. Creative budgeting, I probably would relate to.
Not creative accounting.
Not creative
That's
accounting.
probably the one area we can't do creativity.
Yeah, no one trusts me with a spreadsheet, frankly. So what is it about it? What is it? Why do you love what you do?
I think that's such a good question. It goes back to just childhood interests, what fascinated me. So one of the things that fascinated me when I was little is I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to Epcot in America, which was this place of science meets society meets theme park rides and music and immersion that really captured my imagination, because I was a bit of a nerd. I was one of the kids that asked for an encyclopedia for Christmas. So when it was books. And so I really enjoyed that. Oh, look, it's making science and learning fun. And that's what started to sow the idea of imagination for me, really, and start to think about how powerful it is and how you can make boring things really interesting, how you can bring people along, and storytelling is huge in this space. So it's that it can do so much. And for me now, it can do so much, and still we're a bit fearful of it. We don't harness it. We see it as sometimes a bit silly and childlike, and we're grown-ups, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. But play, imagination, and creativity is one thing I think we really need to bring back more in the world, because I think it will make the world a better place.
I totally agree. I think as adults we don't play enough. I do try to think about trying to play more, but it's difficult, and it's so easy to get stuck into adulting, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And I think a good example of that is there's a lot of people that use Lego now at work, and it's called serious Lego, because we have to put the word serious before it. Otherwise, it's seen as a silly play. And I was just like, fine, I get it. And it's breaking down that barrier. But also, it doesn't actually. The fun play is where we can have some of our best ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, that starts to make sense. So, what are the core skills and kind of core knowledge areas that you would focus on?
Yes, so there's a number of things we can look at. The easiest one is rest. So, and the one people take, it's the hardest to do. Taking time, taking space. There's lots of history to show how creators have done this can lead to good ideas, or at least position your mind to have them later. It's reading outside stuff to do with your business can create an idea about your business, and it always feels counterintuitive, because I shouldn't be reading about this or taking this rest because I've got this to do. But actually it can bring good ideas, and that's part of a creative, imaginative mindset that you have to build in rest. So it's the oddest thing, but the one I always talk about first, because I think it's really important that we reset and we allow connections to happen, because you can't imagine well if you are in a frenetic mindset that's looking at the day-to-day. So you've got to start to recognize that's important, and I've got to find time to rest, because my business and I will be better for it. And that's really difficult, I think, for people to bed in. And that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make it any less true or important. There's good evidence to show that that's the case. So that would be my first one. Then we've got lots of visioning and imaginative training things. So how can you imagine better? How can you imagine well? And there's lots of little tools and exercises you can do about repositioning, reframing thinking. And that, again, is something you can practice, but we can all do pretty much from the off. We do it in our daily lives, as I've said before, but you can build that skill. And I guess a third one, if we're to just break it down, is then futures thinking. So there's a lot of work in how we think about futures, and often we don't think about futures. So there are many possible futures. There are plausible futures and implausible futures, and there are preferable futures and probable futures. So you can take a moment in time now and go, that's the probable future, and we resign ourselves to that, and therefore only make actions that reinforce that future. Or we can think about what preferable future. So we have to take time, we have to map that out, and then we have to backcast and think, what would we need to do to get there? And so that's the third tool, as we start to think about how can we work to a future that we want collectively or within our business, as opposed to just follow what's probable.
Yeah.
And probable is when we're just locked into immediacy because we're not changing anything. And that's, if we know that isn't what we want, then there's the driver to start thinking a bit more long term. And again, hard to think long term when we've got short term pressures.
Yeah. But that makes sense. And actually, that's obviously, it's another type of framework, right? It's very similar to the OKR framework at Zocchio. We've talked about this before. Actually naming, so creating an ambition or a moonshot or a big goal or an audacious goal, whatever you want to call it, and then working out the steps to get there, and sort of wrapping behaviors and metrics and all the rest of it around it actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think key to that, and why I like OKRs so much, is that flexibility, that if something changes, policy that affects your business, environment, legal, technical, there's lots of things that can come in and impact on your business, then you change it, or you look if it needs changing. You don't just carry on as if nothing's changing around you. So that ability to be confident in change. And what we see a lot of organizations do is we have this mission and a strategy, which is often a goal without the detail. There's a lot of bad strategy out there, if I'm honest. And so they go, well, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. You're like, the whole world has changed. You've still got your 5-year plan. Got to be more responsive. And so that's what I kind of like, that more OKR. Have a mission. Absolutely. That helps guide your choices. Strategy needs to be flexible underneath. So you can have a 5-year one, but be ready to upend it, change it, and shape it and review it regularly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everything's changing every day at the moment, every hour of every day, it feels like. So there's the middle one that I'm really interested in, that there's a set of tools or frameworks or approaches to learning how to be more creative.
Yeah. So they can be just very easy, quick tools. Some can be more deeper and more complex, but just as, I guess, one to throw off, if you look out of the window now, it's not so great for me. It is raining, but it's autumn. It's autumn. So what I can see is leaves changing, green, oranges. The weather's quite changeable at the moment. We're getting a mixture of different things. So you take that as a prompt and you say, so what does autumn tell about me? And you think about these things and you hear a lot of change. And then you go, what would that mean in a business context? What does change mean? What does working in autumn mean? Now, we're not farmers, so it isn't like there's some direct learning here. But what we can say is, if autumn's about harvest and celebration and bringing things together, have I took stock of what I've done with my team and celebrated now? Have we just motored through? Because there's always this odd moment in the year. It's like a second new year, September into October. The summer, and no matter what industry, quite a few people are taking holiday, and then we come back and reset. And that's very at odds with the season, which is often about bringing things to fruition, closing things off, celebrating them, and actually moving to winter and hibernation. So you can take this cue of something nothing to do with your work and then reflect on that. And actually that can tell you something about, I haven't spoken with the team actually. Have we closed off that project before we've started this one? Have we actually took stock, took a moment and thought, what do we want to do by the end of this calendar year into the next financial year? Just as a look, and it's just an example as where you take something outside to prompt thinking about something else. And that's a creative, imaginative exercise that starts to stretch your muscles because it gives you a different position. You're not sitting there as CEO or business lead. You've just took a moment to go, I'm sat outside in the autumn thinking about how this affects my job. So it prompts you to just thinking outside your normal frame, and that can bring up something highly interesting, useful, or not. And this is creativity, because not everything has to be useful.
Yeah.
Free writing is another example. Sit down with a blank piece of paper and just write whatever's in your head. So when I've done with that, sometimes you do it directed because people are working on a written piece or a report, or it could just be, just get your thoughts about your business, your task, just write. Don't censor yourself, don't edit, pour it out. And then what I ask is usually, now throw it in the bin, and no one ever wants to because it's produced something they want to keep.
Well,
And then again, that's interesting because you're just taking off some constraints to allow yourself to just see what's there. And again, you can write absolute garbage and that's fine because you're not wasting, you're spending 5 minutes at most, but you pour some things out. And these are just the little tools, and there's numerous different ones you can use that just give you a different frame of reference. And it's positionality, frames of reference, standing somewhere different. That for me is one of the essences of creative thinking, allowing to see something differently, thinking otherwise, basically. And that's how we start to imagine. So again, it's just a bit of time and it's fun. Again, it's fun, thinking about how autumn reflects on your work. It's just a fun little exercise that you don't have to hold too deeply before you go into the far more difficult stuff. But it might help you unpick some of that.
nice. Okay. So on the flip side of that, what are the really hard things to do? And if they're not solved, how can they derail and how can you stop that?
Yeah, so hard things to do is it's very easy to say, oh, imagine a future and we'll work towards it. That's very complicated, actually. If you're to do it deeply, so you could do like a day's workshop where you do this and you just do it in a sense, team building, get a sense of where to go. If you look at how they do it in some government departments when they're thinking about futures and forecasting, and government ministries do have futures and forecasting departments now, you might take 9 months. You're interviewing people, you're speaking with experts, you're trying to identify what trends are happening, what's emerging just underneath that might shape the world around us, the world of work. So you start doing that, and then you start working with your teams and scoping, and then you start imagining futures, testing them back, and it's actually quite a complex, scientific, and difficult process. So imagining a good future, a realistic future, a pragmatic, realistic future that you can work towards tangibly isn't that easy and does require time. So imagination can be easy. We can do it in a few seconds. Imagining well, particularly the further we go into the future, actually it is hard. It requires time, it requires structure and skill. So it's not something we can just go, I've done it. Now, if you think about how many strategies get written, very quickly, you can start to see why we have challenges in what's good and bad strategy.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you guide people to overcome those challenges? Is this just taking the time and finding the right tools?
Time, structure, and tools, like everything. You could say that true of leadership or accountancy. It's usually skills, knowledge, and tools. But I think with what's hardest about this one is the recognition of time. It's allowing yourself to think about medium and long term when you have a short term pressure. And that is the hardest thing to do, because I've worked in a senior management role where your emails are never ending, something news every day, policies change, your team need this. How on earth is it relevant even to think about 5 years' time when I've got this on my desk today? One is to say that's all interconnected anyway. The decisions you made 5 years ago, why you're dealing with things today. So it's to see that, everything's connected and it is worth your time, but carving it out really is tough and requires a bit of a mindset shift, I think, to getting embedded daily, but a little bit a day can help. Constantly reflecting on strategy help. It's not like I'm asking, take out a week, imagine the future, come back, we'll reset business. No, things are moving fast. I think the other thing is change it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's also fair to say change is becoming more embedded as a constant in our world, personal, private, public, and professional lives. There was a government report came out this week on universities that said universities has to get better at working in an increasing and volatile operating environment. That's true of everyone, but universities have had a business model that stayed the same for a very, very long time, give or take some shifts. That's not true of many other businesses too. And what we're being told is actually, how can we be empowered and comfortable working in constant change? So that requires a different way of working and a different sort of team structure that's a bit more agile and a bit more forward thinking. Because if you're constantly reacting to change, you're firefighting, you're doing these emails every day and you'll never get out of it.
Yeah.
So that's the bit where you've got to break the cycle, start thinking forward and say, right, change is normal, team. We're not going back to a happy day of the economy is going to help us grow, and we're going to have to constantly innovate, fight, and change within this landscape, and that requires us to work differently.
Yeah. And from personal experience, I know how hard that is. So, moving, I was running agencies for a long time, was in the commercial side of the agency space, and that was all about quick reaction, lightning reaction. And then as I moved into leadership roles, I really needed to do less of that and didn't manage that particularly well. I was just still always on call, as it were. And then moving away into coaching, and actually my time having to be more reflective and more thoughtful and much more deep thinking, I still really battle with there's an email coming, I must respond to that. So I'm getting much better at turning that off, but it's taken a long time. That's absolutely ingrained in me. So it's really hard.
I don't think
Hard
that's
task.
unusual actually at all. Leadership is often so often becomes management, and we know the differences, but actually there's a lot to do. And so that should tell us something about structures and team empowerment and agency that we need to think through. But I think that's entirely normal to feel in those spaces. I felt it. I was like, I just feel like I'm doing management all the time. Where's the leadership? And you get these little moments, and I'm not spending it's a real challenge to do that. But I think we've got to move into where we realize that time's good, because that takes that away, frees it up. And I think the coaching practice is really good, because you immediately go, oh, this is different. And I'm doing it similarly now as I've shifted out of a large organization to myself. I'm like, I am in control of every bit of my time now. And so it is on me. Like in my previous role, I would always allow a team member to come and speak to me. That's really important. Now I get to decide how am I chunking things up, and I'm responsible. And I realize that actually I'm looking at it quite differently, although still got this huge corporate working environment still in the back of my mind of you should do this, you should do this, better do emails. It happened to me the other day when I was in London. I was just like, right, get back to emails, look at this, do the socials. And I was like, or take an hour, go and do this, practice what I teach.
So didn't you just right at the top say rest and take
I know.
yourself away?
Exactly. And that's it. So that is hard. I struggle with doing it, and I recognize why it's so important. But it's okay to catch ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've got to do. It's a bit like mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
It's not about being peaceful all the time. It's about catching yourself in thought. And so you go, I'm motoring on when I could be focusing on this. And it's very easy to go, I've got all these emails, because you can do emails, tick, 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 dopamine hits and everything go on. rather than, oh, here's this really tricky, knotty problem about the future that requires some thought. I'll get round to that. So it's really easy to slip into immediacy because it's there, it gets ticked off, we can feel we're being productive.
Yeah.
But process isn't necessarily progress.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember when the smartphones first came out, I was in at one of the very early SEO agencies, and my mentor at the time, it's like, look at this, I can get email while I'm on the beach and while I'm on the train. This is liberating. I was like, sorry, what's liberating about that? Even then, I was like, this is not quite right, but then fell into it like everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And weirdly, since starting my own business, I found that I check more. I was more militant in my last job because I knew I had to protect my time more. When you work for yourself, I think a lot of people know time moves and shifts more, and there's great advantages to that. So that's something I'm constantly just checking. Am I doing this out of habit?
Yeah.
Or am I doing it because I'm now at work?
Yeah.
And I think it's useful to, again, just catch yourself when you're doing it. So your phone's particularly problematic. So my last job, I didn't have work email linked to my phone, but because of the way I've set things up in this job, it is all linked to my phone. I could take it off, but it's always a bit more messy and knotted when you work from home.
Absolutely. Okay, so what misconceptions would people have about what it is that you're doing and offering?
I think the obvious one is this isn't the nuts and bolts of today. It's that I have too much on, I have too much to do, I have too many fires to put out for this to be important. And I'm very good at strategy and mission development. I don't need imaginative, creative thinking to help me do that. So the two things I'd say to that one, I think I've already talked about, is, take the time and realize it's important. But the second one is you are being highly creative through being strategic. Could you be more? How are you testing that with teams? Are your teams built to be that? Who's there to support you? Are you developing that as a skill? Because a lot of leadership's kind of learned on the fly, although there's lots of good programs to help people learn, and we should think of it as a form of continuing professional development. So yes, you can do it, but can you do it even better?
Totally.
So you can be a senior leader and you should always learn more, and you can be a great strategist and creative and you can always learn more. And so for me, it's always about that lifelong commitment to learning across a range of areas. So I think it's just thinking that I know how to do it is perhaps always the point when we fail, whether that's leadership or imagination, or actually where they come together.
Interesting. Yeah, obviously, I'm very much interested in leadership and leadership behaviour as part of the book, and yeah, just that. For me, it just seems to come down to fixed versus growth mindset, right? And if you can identify which you are, do you think, there's a question on the hop, do you think that if you are identified as a fixed mindset person, can that be changed?
Absolutely. And I think Carol Dweck, who sort of theorized in this and worked with children in this space, she's shown how actually by creating environments, tools, the way you speak to yourself and others, how you shift that mindset. And it's not something we should feel bad about. Schools reinforce fixed mindset. I was brought up in quite an achievement driven. When you go into academia, it's always about the next award or grant or publication. So you're constant, and that creates a fixed mindset, which means for all the setbacks, and there's huge in academia and research, there's always a lot of failure, can really affect you. And so growth mindset isn't so built in, but absolutely it can be. You start to see it, that helps, and start to build it. And I'm a strong believer that can do so much. So yeah, I don't think you're an either or. I think you've become a person, or you could be a growth mindset person that's gone into a fixed mindset environment, and that can jar and that can affect who you are. And you see this all the time in leadership. The leadership around you can shape the type of leadership you do, and that can start to jar on your values, etc. But it's very hard to just do different leadership because you're in a system of it. So yeah, I think it's absolutely, it's a skill. It's a mindset again of how we view the world and what's important.
Okay, so just thinking about what's going on in the world around us at the moment and the sort of the current realities of the market, what's the most pressing challenge that you're facing right now?
So I guess for me, it's interesting for me because what's the biggest challenge I think across the piece is economic uncertainty that's coming through all the surveys and changes like that. So that affects everyone in this world of work, working, training, consultancy. As soon as budgets get tight, is growth where we stop? Is thinking about, do we go into emergency or critical management? That's okay if it's a window of time, sort of a bit like COVID, where it was the thing that was trying to be solved and we went into emergency planning. But if change is the norm, you can't do that forever. So for me, it's I guess the challenge is I'm working in that environment too, while also trying to offer solutions to that. So there's this tension I get, which is quite interesting. And for me, one of the biggest challenges, I am still a new business, and I've worked in big industry, academia is big businesses, complex things, teams. I have to do everything now. So, there's a lot of learning on the job when it comes to finances, business development, and things like that I've overseen, but not necessarily always done on the ground. So I guess that those are my immediate challenges, and I can get lost in them. Just like I was saying, you could just go, oh, what's next? What's this? And then just going, what's the bigger picture? Stop. Am I even imagining that's the right answer that I'm currently doing, or actually am I distracting myself? So yeah, I think for me there's an element of it's still new, adjusting to all those things as any startup or entrepreneur, which is a word that I just don't associate with myself. So might have, but we're working in a very complex, changeable time when everyone is nervous, I think, to say, because everything is unsettled. I think what we're going to have to learn is how can we shift nerves into confidence, because the environment won't change. So how can we see change as opportunity as opposed to constant threat?
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a conversation last week, and the term change fatigue was coined, or it wasn't coined, but was introduced to me. So it's just so true. It's true of so many, of clients and people that I'm talking to. Everyone's like, what is next? What have we got to deal with next? It's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think, and that isn't, I think accepting that is probably how it will be for quite some time, forever. Who knows? I don't think we should think there are these windows. So how can we replace change with agility, flexibility, and innovation, and see that as like real assets in our organization to constantly be growing, be thinking that's quite exciting. Then all of a sudden we're talking about growth, we're talking about new ideas, moving business forward, because we're always going to this stop start, which is work sort of historically sector dependent, is getting harder and harder to do. We're not going to find a lovely horizon for quite some time, whether it be supply change, because they're still up in the air with sort of geopolitics, or through technology, because AI is going to constantly keep shifting the landscape. And I think it's keeping alive to those trends as well. So there's various little tools that can tell you about stuff that's emerging at the moment that might become really big in later years. Nothing's guaranteed, but it gives you a sense. And one of those is the financial stress for Gen Z and millennials. Huge pressure on that. What will that play out in terms of how they work, how they want to work, how they are at work? Or if you're in the property thing, what does it mean for that? And so you can start to go, here's a trend that is becoming increasingly serious and known. What does that mean for my retail work? What does that mean for my products, my workforce? And that's just one way of looking at it. And you go, well, it means quite a lot, actually. How can I better prepare for it, or prepare for scenarios? So then when it's not change happened, oh no, it's we have that. Pick it off the shelf. We've got an idea of how we deal with that.
Okay. I think you've actually started to answer my next question. So the podcast is about growth and growth catalyst. So if you had 10, 15 minutes with a CEO, a business leader, what advice would you give them?
I think first, the cold, hard fact that 70% of businesses have not grown in the last 12 months. So we're at a moment and it's challenging and difficult. So know that, and maintaining might be a good strategy as well as growth in difficult times. Nothing wrong with maintaining a business. Obviously, as costs rise, and they will, energy, etc., it's hard to maintain a business, but you could factor that in as maintaining alongside growth. So one, sort of recognize that times are very challenging, and be thinking, I think, about when we do this, we can shrink into a shell of competition. So this is me, I've got this, and they're doing this, and they're doing this. And is there sort of a collaborative advantage that could be taken? What opportunities are to work together? We see that mobile phones are a great example, that they've got Samsung's got products and Apple phones, and they all work, and they're all doing well. What opportunity is there for collaborative advantage? Just feels the opposite again of where we are now, but can help with growth. Where can we work together to be more efficient, more effective, and those things? So looking out rather than shrinking in, because that's exactly what growth is. We don't shrink in to grow. We move out. And so thinking about that in terms of your relationships and what they might mean for future work.
Nice. I like that. So are there any, that might have been it, but are there any quick wins that you could give a leader of an organization that they could sort of go away and implement? I mean, so right at the top, you were talking about just taking time, and there are certain tools to just try and unlock some creativity or investment in time. Is there something that you'd say, just go do, go think, go
So
do?
it's so important. I'm going to say it again. Take a rest, take a day. So the poet and activist Maya Angelou's wrote an essay on taking a day. And she says we should all take a day where we have, no family obligations, no work obligations, and you don't commit to anything. You're not going to a spa. You're just going to roam without and move around and just allow your mind to be free. And I gave this advice to my team when I worked back in there: take a day. And it's hard if you've got kids and responsibilities. Obviously, I know that. So take an hour to see what you can do to take some time without aim. Again, feels the opposite. I think that moment of reset is so fundamental, so important, can open so much. So I did it for the first time in a long time when I was down in London, had a day, was thinking I could do all these things. And I just went into the Tate Modern and I spent 4 hours just going around really slowly. And that wasn't quite with the advice, because I stayed in one place too long and I should have just frittered around. But I just did it I wasn't there to look at art. I wasn't there to have an idea. It just really sat, and I was on my own because other half had the kids. So I had no obligations, no meetings. And I came back and then I wrote on the train back. I had all these ideas started to come up. So it was productive in the end, but going in with the aim of it not being, so not trying. And it just creates space. And that space allows you to then think about some of the challenges you've had, because actually thinking on them on again, oh, this is a really hard challenge, you just get locked into it. And just taking a moment and just going, is probably the most important thing anyone can do, and the hardest. So it's the first one. I've used it with my teams before, and it's the one I always tell people to do because I think it's so powerful, albeit counterintuitive.
But just to be clear, take a day with no objective.
No objectives, no obligations, no phone calls, no home or work pressures. Half a day, an hour, whatever you can find in your real life, but just with no obligations. Not a mental health walk. That's not the same. You've gone with a name. I'm walking for exercise. And no, you're just going to roam. Just going to roam wherever you are, or go somewhere, and just with no aim. It's hard to do, actually. You realize just how trained our minds are to constantly find productivity in what we're doing.
Yeah, with my ADHD brain.
So
it's difficult to switch it off, but I like
it
that.
is.
And I do love, actually, if you do get the opportunity to just have a couple of hours to yourself where you have no obligations, it is just heaven. And you're right, the best thoughts, ideas, whether it's personal or professional, do just start to crystallize in those moments.
Yeah, you can't think creatively if you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We are almost all, and when times are going to be overwhelming, if change is going to be a thing, then we need to work really hard, because it's not going to naturally happen, to look after ourselves and find that space to allow us to think well about what we want for our businesses.
Nice. Nice. Okay. So what questions should leaders be asking of their teams?
What futures do they think there is for the organization and for themselves? I think is an interesting one. Empowering your teams to take hold of this strategy. What challenges do they think? That's, I think, really important, actually. When you're in a leadership role, you don't necessarily, I mentioned those trends that are emerging. People on the ground will see those trends. They'll know. It'll be people on the front line that are seeing how people are interacting, what they're saying, what they're doing. They've got knowledge that's going to help out the future. Seeding that and getting that and being very, I guess, humble and open and vulnerable in your leadership is really important to addressing the futures. So asking teams about how they perceive their futures and future in the business and what their customers are thinking, I think can be invaluable.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. So just looking over the horizon. So the next 12 months, I have to say this every time, nobody's got a crystal ball. I think it's impossible to predict the future, but is there any suggestions, recommendations that you give to our listeners about how they might be able to prepare for the next 12 months?
I think that the point you say, actually, any futures work, all this imagining work, isn't about predicting the future. Actually tells us a lot about the present. So when I did an exercise with people on the futures, people felt a more socially connected future, and that taught us a lot about how we're feeling about today. So one of these things about thinking about the future is tells us a lot about where we are now. And it's not about predicting the future, it's about being able to adapt and change with it. So I think you make a really important point when we think about that, because people can often think this is just crystal balling. So 12 months, it'd be looking at those emerging trends that we're thinking about. So we've got tense geopolitics affecting supply chains. We've got economic uncertainty coming. We've got changes in generational workforce challenges. These are all going to keep happening and keep going. The government, we have an element of stability in as much as they have 3 years ahead to put plans in. So we can start, if your work, well, everyone's work leans some way into one of the policy areas, having a good grasp of that, we're going to get some stability, so you can start to work within a more stable-ish policy environment. So if you know certain trade or environmental policies coming through, you can start to know you can work towards that. So again, just seeing what's happening in that space can help you plan for those next 12 months. But I think more than anything, it's just keeping ready and alert. I think the next 12 months will not be dissimilar. There's going to be no magic changes that are going to happen in terms of the economy or societal and geopolitical challenges. So I think that trickles down in many, many ways, right down to whatever business you do, and that will stay. So I think just accepting that is how you'll plan for the next 12 months.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, kind of back to that agile, just double checking, just making that investment in double checking what your intended future look like, and does that marry up to what's actually going on around you?
Take ownership of it.
Yeah.
So one thing we often terrible for doing is that if the government sort this out, my business would be fine. Or, well, assume that that's out of your control, because in part it is. And what are you going to do within that? Because waiting actually is the worst human condition, where we wait for something around us to happen. We've got to take agency and ownership. So I think, again, that's really key.
Interesting. Okay. So as you're aware, wrote a book on leadership behavior, and I was curious to ask. So I've been with all my guests. This is not about naming and shaming, as you're aware. I'd like to know if you've got a story of either a terrible experience, which everybody seems to have, of a leader or a manager that's done something awful, Or the other side of that coin is, do you have a moment where someone, a manager or a leader, has done something so profound that it's potentially changed the course of your professional direction or even your life? Have you got one of those anecdotes for us?
Yeah, so could go either way, couldn't we? Yeah, I've got the example of way back when a micromanager shouting at you in a public cafe, less than ideal, and then how that can make you really shrink into yourself and you're more worried about perceptions and things and not able to work well. But if we just try and think more positively about what we can learn, I think more recently I've had managers that have really asked where I wanted to go, and accepting this business need allowed me to grow within and around that and then out of that, and supported a move on. And I think that's always been amazing because it kept me in the organization, albeit in a different role where I then grew further, because that manager wasn't so, this is what we need to do as our closed little team, but could see wider benefit, wider support. And if her team are happy, they'll be more productive. So that idea of, rather than thinking about roles, thinking about people, and then if people do well and they're connected, what does that mean in the bigger picture? And I felt that was really brilliant leadership, to think beyond your directorate into a much broader picture, while also supporting your team member as well. I really sort of took that with me, because it really does require you to think beyond your immediate challenges.
Yeah, that's nice. And actually, that's interesting, because what I've kind of picked up in our conversation, the theme of what you've been talking about is basically, don't bury your head in the sand and don't make any assumptions. Like, stuff is going on around you, so just take a little time to connect with yourself, but then start to look around and find out what's going on, and maybe just stop ignoring some of this stuff, which I can absolutely relate to.
Yeah, we all can. I think being vulnerable is part of that, and being really open to development and change and learning from your team.
Yeah, so collaboration, good communication. Thank you, Professor Kieran. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? A question I didn't ask you?
No, I think it's been a really exciting chat, and it's always good to reflect on all these things in its complexity, and it's certainly helped me with my business moving forward.
Good. Well, I've really enjoyed today. I think that I quite often say it, but perhaps I'm not particularly good at living it, just playing. I think it's Clint Eastwood that's, he's said, "Don't let the old man in." I actually do really subscribe to that in my head, but then do I actually live it through? So yeah, just going back to play. And serious Lego, I think, sounds quite depressing. What's wrong with just Lego?
Well, exactly.
Lego.
Put a meeting in your diary with yourself, and that's when you do it. If you really need to force it, just do it. Or a meeting with an imaginary person. I might put one in with Judy Garland. Can't refuse a meeting with Judy Garland, can I? So, and that's my time to read something slightly outside of the norm.
Yeah, I love that. Brilliant. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Been an absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you.
I'll speak to you soon.